Wassailing was this tradition where you would go house to house. No, I'm sorry. Well, that's kind of what it became. But Wassailing often was a tradition where poor people would go to rich people's houses and essentially demand the best food and drink, especially if the poor people happened to work for the rich person in question. That it was this day of social inversion where the poor were kind of king for a day. And so this was especially true in rich households that had servants. The servants kind of had the right on Christmas Day to basically barge into the main house and demand the best food and drink of the house. And they were kind of, the owners were kind of obligated to give it to them as this kind of this sign of well-wishing. This is where "We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year" comes from. Now bring us some figgy pudding and we won't leave until we get some. It's the Wassailing song is where that has its origins.
I've been dating my girlfriend for a couple of years now, and every single Christmas we spend together, the figgy pudding issue comes up. She'll turn to me, she goes, "I don't understand what this is." And it's like, I don't understand what this is either. I read the section of the book and I turned to her and I go, "I'm going to tell you what this figgy pudding is all about."
I love it.
David, Dr. David Kyle Johnson, because it's extortion. It's like extortion from the lower classes, you know. It's this weird trick-or-treating with a real threat of with songs and this undercurrent of potential violence.
Yeah, absolutely, right. But Stephen Nussbaum in his book, The Battle for Christmas, calls it totally is extortion, but it's a social safety valve to make up for the other extortion that happens the other days of the year, right? So in other words, these servants have been extorted all year long, right? And so essentially we're going to come back and extort you for a day. And if you give in and kind of give us your best foot, well, you prove you're not such a bad guy. And that kind of keeps us happy for another year of you extorting us or whatever. So Nussbaum calls it this kind of the social safety valve, that where there's this kind of pressure that's released on that day where, you know, the poor get to take advantage of the rich for that day. And that makes the reverse happening every other day of the year sort of okay. And that's why there was this real tension in New York City. This actually leads to the domestication of Christmas. Like that ritual worked when you had servants that worked directly for masters, because the servants knew the masters knew the servants. It makes sense to open up your house to people that you know, even if they're, you know, your servants, right? But what happened with the Industrial Revolution in New York is that people who had servants no longer knew them. They were, you know, industry owners. They were factory owners that had all of these employees, but they didn't know them from Adam, right? They didn't know, right? And the employees didn't know their employer from Adam, right? They didn't know where they lived, and they didn't have the right, as it were, to get in their house. And so New York, especially, became at Christmas time became this time where, like, all of these poor people who worked in these factories thought they were owed, and they kind of were, this right of wassailing, but they had nowhere to go. They had no master, as it were, to go to their house. And so they just started roaming around randomly, knocking on rich people's doors, demanding entrance and food and drink. And they were like, the rich people were like, "I don't want to let these people into my house. I don't know who these people are," right? And so they would not let them in. And so they would turn violent. And so it was kind of an uncomfortable thing to be a rich person in New York.